your emotions on God. The first thing you do when you're in pain, you tell God how you feel. You don't tell him how you think you ought to feel. You don't tell him how you should feel. You don't tell what would be right to feel. You tell him how you actually feel. Did you know that when God listens to you, he wants you to be honest? And that when you are honest to God about your emotions, that's actually an act of worship? Even when you're disappointed, even when you're expressing frustration, even when you express doubt and fear or anything to God, you say, God, I'm afraid. God, I'm guilty. God, I'm resentful. God, I'm sad. God, life sucks. This is terrible. I can't stand what I'm going through. When you're talking to God, you're still focusing on him, and that's worship. And so you start, no matter what's gone wrong in your life, by telling God exactly how you feel. Now, notice Job's reaction to the disaster in his life. Job says this. It says this about Job. Job stood up. He tore his robes in grief. That, by the way, is a Middle Eastern custom. And he shaved his head. That's a Middle Eastern custom. And then he fell to the ground and he worshiped God. He's acting in total humility and in despair and in doubt and in frustration and anger. Anytime you have a loss in your life, any kind of loss, you're going to have four emotions. You're going to have anger. Why did this happen to me? You're going to have grief. What have I lost? You're going to have shock. What's going on here? And you're going to have questions. Why did this happen? I can't believe this is going on. You're going to have fear. What's going to happen next? You know what? You need to express every one of those emotions to God. You don't need to hold it in. You don't need to say, God, I'm happy about this. You can say, God, I'm angry. God, I'm fearful. God, I'm frustrated. I'm scared. You tell him exactly how you feel. Let me let you in on a little secret. Some of you I've told this to before, but some of this is new for you. God can handle any emotion you've got. And you know why? Because he gave them to you. The only reason you have any feelings, you have any emotions, is because you were made in the image of God. It's what makes you different from animals. And God is an emotional God. The reason you have emotions is because God has emotions. All those emotions came from him, and he can handle them. He can handle your anger. He can handle your doubt. He can handle your fear. He can handle your complaints. All of that. In fact, Job was brutally honest with God. In Job chapter 7, verse 11, he says this, I can't be quiet. I'm angry. I have to speak. He's saying, God, I'm ticked off. And if you read the book of Job, you will actually see a progression in his reaction to his giant setback where he literally lost everything, devastated. First, he expresses confusion. What's going on in my life? You ever felt like that? Yeah. Then, number two, he starts complaining. Then he starts blaming God for all his pain. And at one point he says, God, you didn't do this right. You handled it wrong. You let all this bad stuff happen to me. And God, I don't like it or like you right now. Well, God can handle that emotion. The right response to loss or to tragedy or to disaster is not to grin and bear it. The right response when someone, causes a setback in your life, God never wants you to fake an emotion. Remember that. God never wants you to fake emotion. He doesn't want you to put on a happy face. That's faking it. Never, never, never. He doesn't want you to fake emotion. Doesn't want you to say pious platitudes, what you think you ought to say to God in prayer. He wants you to honestly tell him how you're struggling. God, I'm grieving right now. God, I'm hurting right now. God, I'm in a lot of pain. I'm depressed. I'm discouraged. I'm having some doubts. You tell it all to God, and God can handle it. I'm just wondering how many of you who are listening to me are parents. Because if you're a parent, you know what I'm talking about. Now, this may have never happened to you, but it certainly has happened to me. Sometimes my children, I know this will shock you, actually question my judgment. Sometimes my kids question my judgment. Now, my kids never question that I love them. They know I love them. They've never doubted that. And they don't question that I've been around a lot longer than they have been. I've experienced a whole lot more in life than they have. But sometimes they do question my wisdom, Daddy's wisdom. And you know what? I'd rather have an honest conversation with my kids than have them stuff it. I'd rather have my kids say, you know, Dad, I think you're way off on this. Why did you do that? I think that was a dumb thing to do. I'd rather have my kids talk to me honestly than to stuff it down. And so would God. Lamentations 2:19 says this, cry out in the night. Pour out your heart like water. What's that mean? Spill your guts. Pour out your heart like water in prayer to the Lord. With God, honesty is always the best policy. And at the end of the story, God actually commends and praises and encourages Job because he did this first step in the TRUST. He told God exactly how he felt. He was honest. Job never stopped trusting God, even when he was angry, even when he was upset, even when he didn't understand it, when he was confused, when he had doubts, even when he thought God had messed it all up. He still kept trusting God, but he was just honest. Now, the Bible gives us a lot of examples of many godly people who expressed their frustration to God. One time there was a guy named Jeremiah, and he gets upset at what God did. He says, God, you have deceived me. He's a prophet. Jeremiah's a prophet. He says, I think you've lied to me, God, and things haven't turned out the way you told me they were going to turn out, and I'm mad at you. God allows that in the Bible. Another time there's a woman named Naomi, and things don't go well for her. She says, call me bitter because God has made my life bitter. It's in the Bible. Another time there's a guy named David who says, Lord, I've taken the worst from you, and I've taken all that you can give, and I'm fed up. I've had it. And God says, you're a man after my own heart. These people were trusting God to handle their emotions. And Job did that too. Now, although he expressed his fear and his questions and his frustrations and his doubts, he says, I'm still going to trust you, Lord, even though I don't understand it. And I'm going to do exactly what you tell me to do, even though I feel like blowing it all off. And I'm going to tell you how I feel because I know you can handle it. You know, there's another guy in the Bible named Habakkuk. How'd you like to have that name? Habakkuk. He had the same problem. And Habakkuk wrote a little short book near the end of the Old Testament of the Bible. It's called the book of, you guessed it, Habakkuk. It's only 3 chapters long. And you can summarize the whole book in one word. Why? Why, God? Why is this happening to me? If you've ever felt that question, why is this happening to me? Why God? Why me? Why now? Then you need to go read the book of Habakkuk. What happened in his lifetime is that Habakkuk saw his nation being overrun by terrorists. That sound familiar? And they were just devastating the country, and they were brutal, and they were destroying his nation right in front of his eyes. And Habakkuk was really upset about it, and he complains to God. He says, God, I don't know what I'm going to do. And he's asking why. There's another guy who did that named David. David went through a really tough time, and he didn't know how to handle it. And here's what he says in Psalm 116, verse 10. In the middle of his setback, his deep despair, David says, I believed, so I said, I'm completely ruined. Now, that sounds like a contradiction. Look at that verse on your outline. David says, I believed, so I said, I'm ruined. What in the world is he talking about? What is he saying? Well, what he's saying is, because I believe in God, I know I can complain to God. You ever thought about this? Who does an atheist complain to? Himself? I mean, if you complain to God about your life, it means that you at least believe there's a God. And David says, I believed, so I complained. And I kept on believing even when I said, I'm completely crushed. There's no contradiction in that. Question, what frustrations have you never talked about? Let me ask you that question again. What frustrations have you never talked about? You've never talked to God about them, much less talk to a counselor about it or whatever. That frustration at work, that frustration in your marriage, that frustration with your body, that frustration in a relationship or friendship with your parents, that frustration with that wacko relative of yours. and you're feeling, I don't like this, God, but you've never talked to God about it. God can handle it. The first step to trusting God on the road to comeback is to tell him exactly how you feel. That's the T. Tell him exactly how I feel. Now, the second way to trust God for a comeback, when everything looks fatal, final, and no way out of it.